For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Moferefere Lekorotsoana joins me to discuss his book titled Shapes, Shades and Faces. Welcome, Moferefere.
Thank you very much, Sane.
Thank you. Can you tell us about your love for poet, how it started?
My love for poetry actually began from childhood. And it started with watching the old men in my home, which is mainly my father, and an old man who was our neighbor then. This is in the Eastern Cape, in a small town called Alwell North. You know, those houses that we call them coaches because the houses are one block, so the doors are next to each other. But these two old men, they would do what I sometimes call, in modern day, freestyling sort of. And they would come out and they would just start praising. People call it praise poetry. They would do praise poetry and they would speak. And they told tales and stories of what was really happening in society at the time. And they would take jibes at each other. So if one was, had done something and so on. So there would be like this freestyling competition in this Sesotho. And it was always fascinated me. And my father also, besides doing it as a recitals, he also wrote a lot in terms of poetry. And wrote also other short stories, but in main he would write lots and lots of poetry. I remember even when my elder sister got married, he wrote a poem about the events of that day in the steep Sesotho. So that's always been this thing that's always there, that is like really fascinating. So I, as a kid, even when I was at primary school, I started writing, when you start writing those poems, I love my mom, love is, and so I started dabbling with that as a child. And fortunately, one of my teachers who had seen me, writing this, she would, Mistress Nana, we call her, Mem Maki later, she became, she always said, can you write this for that? And I think I was probably about maybe 9 years old or something. And suddenly there was a funeral of one old lady in the community. And I got this invitation to go and recite something at the funeral. And can you imagine a 9-year-old? I was shaking. And I remember in my mind, I don't remember the content of the poem, but I know the title of the poem was Mother's Love, because I had it dedicated to this old woman who was a mother to these family friends. So it's been there for a very long time. And throughout, I kept writing. Even in the 1980s, I wrote lots of poems. A friend of mine, on these Facebook notes, wrote that he didn't even realize that I was writing. And then the other one retorted by saying, well, he's been writing forever. Remember the poem Hope that was in the youth journal and magazine? It's one of his poetry. And I was like, wow, I had even forgotten that poem. So there's snippets of places where I had written. I wrote a lot in the 1980s to the magazines and like the Staff Rider, etc. So it's been something that I liked doing, but I didn't, it was just one of those things I loved.
And how would you encourage the youth to love this kind of writing?
That's always a difficult thing. However, one thing that's encouraging in the country now is there's a lot of young people who are actually writing. And also a lot of young people who are doing lots of recitals. I know even with my son, who's 20 years old now at university, he also does what they call the spoken word. So they go out and they stand, which is a great thing. And actually some of the young poets today who are making it, there are people who used to go to what an old friend of mine who's late now, Peter Makurube, he had this thing called the Monday Blues. And it was an open mic session on a Monday in Hillbrow, Yeovil. When people would come up and take a mic and either play a song or just go into a recital. Some of them are now established poets. So it's there. It just needs encouragement and enablement from different perspectives for those who actually really like writing. Because, of course, there are many people who would say, I'm a poet. And actually you listen to it, you think like, not sure about that. Which is why I'm also quite cagey to say I am a poet. And I've always been wary of saying I'm a poet, because I think every art form requires a dedication to it and a commitment to it, and an investment that begins to make it what it's supposed to be. So you can not just give it the love and the excitement and passion, but the actual work and the rigor that goes into it. So, but there are young people, and this country actually that's the fun part of it. When you go to these spoken word events, you'll meet all sorts of young people that you've never met. And it's about how you find maybe people who are a lot more seasoned, let's use that word, who have expertise, who can then guide them in terms of how they do that. And I think because of the rap music and the hip hop, so young people get into that quite easily, and it's about linking those.
Yeah, I was about to ask about hip hop, because my son said hip hop is poet. So is it really poet?
Indeed, it is. It is poetry, and that's why I'm saying when I look at my father and that generation, and Mokhabane, Langman, when they did that, that's why I can say it's like what today you call hip hop or freestyle, because that kind of poetry that we call praise poetry, it has different rhythms, and it's not always the same kind of thing. I imagine, for instance, sometimes when it's sung, you would hear maybe an old man going like, that's you playing with words, and that's what hip hop and rap is about. But when you don't have that sense of that background and that knowledge, you don't get it. Maskandi people do the same thing.
Exactly,
it's right there. That's poetry. It's been put in a modernized form, done by younger people, and maybe not done, say, written like in a book kind of thing. But it's all there. It's about appreciating the roots thereof, because it's all about telling the story of life, but maybe telling it in different ways.
So what kind of life lessons do you write about? Do you have a specific genre that you look for?
Well, no. It's my writings cut across anything. It's about you would say it's about love. It's about people I've met. It's about experiences of life that I've had. And in some ways I try and say that what I write about, if it's almost like if the word itself can carry my own experiences, and in some ways the experiences of the people I live with and live around and lived with, and that's what it is. So you would find some of my writings about moments of life when I was maybe depressed personally. It could be an individual I would have met at some point who had an impact on me, or purely an observation of it could be someone walking, and I get fascinated with that person who walks. Sometimes it's about, for instance, I love rain and thunder and lightning, so I tend to find a lot of that writing into it in many ways. Of course, everybody has to write love stories. Love is the most important thing that keeps us going, I guess, and both its ups and downs, and you'll find that a lot of that in my writing. I also have written a lot about the period of our, let's say, the struggle in South Africa. How sometimes we didn't think we're moving, sometimes we're moving, And in some instances, I think it was calling people forward to say, now that we are over the difficult point in life, let's find each other. For instance, one of the poems, they say, "Come walk with me." It's really about that. Let's take this now new journey together. It's about that hopefulness. It's also about the new things. The poem about "I am freedom." It tries to recount the joy of 1994. We all went to vote. You know, we are this freedom. I am this freedom. But that freedom is not just. It's also me. It's you. We who then vote. So it's trying to find those moments. It's also about hope. It's a memory of being abroad and remembering certain aspects of life and wishing for home. So the poem I wrote, which I call Msawawa, my love, you know. So and it basically its rhythm goes something like, between us there is only a chasm of dreams I weave for you. Because you have these dreams, you have these hopes, and you are far away from home, and you wish for things that to be. And you can almost picture people and they walk in the streets of Johannesburg or in the street of the small towns that you've been, and it somehow has carried you. Yeah.
So, other than that, who are you trying to attract with your poem, with your work?
My hope is rather that people read the poems and they interpret them for themselves. They find inspiration in them. And in some ways, those who probably would have lived in that part of time or that period of time or that kind of life can draw maybe strength. But in terms also of hope, that you know that there's hope in what we're doing. It's not all lost. I know when we read newspapers and watch television, we think the world is going to fall apart. Why have you look at everybody thinking like, why have we wasted our time doing this? Like, it's not worth it. Hopefully some of the writings will give that sense of like, it's actually not all done for. There's more to life, there's more to meaning. So it's writings for everyone. It's not specifically for a particular generation. It's writings for everyone, and everyone who loves the word. If you're biblical, as you always say, that in the beginning there was a word, and it is the word. So it must be a word for you, and the meaning should be for you, and you can carry it depending on where you are at. I suppose when you are thinking of a love affair that went, in a bad direction, and you find a poem there, it might resonate with you. When you have lost a child, whether it was during the upheavals of South Africa, you find a poem in there that maybe resonates with you. And I know some of the poems, yes, they are specific, because it's about my home. About the two poems specifically, I'm thinking of the one is it's called Apollo's Flight. It's about a young boy who was killed in the 1980s, and he was just a kid. He was just running to his mother's shack, and the soldier shot him dead. And there was another young girl. She was about 14 years old. They were playing the skipping rope in the middle of the street, but the soldiers were out there, and she was the one who was picked up and died. And I, the memory of her mother being there and crying over this child. So that's specific to a particular community about their own experience of life. It's also the specificity about living in KwaZulu-Natal during the difficult times, in the 9 Days War, etc. By trying to say, using the words, is a poem that's using the words, say, it's all in the names. That's what the poem says. It's about Imbali, sweet waters, and say, well, at one point these waters were like really sour, but now suddenly let's think of them as sweet, as the name of the place is. Hammarsdale in Mpumalanga, the sun, where the sun shines. let that sunshine, let that come out. So it's about hope. So you move from one point to the next. So it's about us finding each other. So
Pete, you didn't write anything about Kwamashu, but it's fine.
well, I'm sure one day I'll write about Kwamashu one day, but I think Izalo as a TV series is doing much better.
Okay. And how will you respond to people who are saying poetry is boring?
I have heard that so many times, but I suppose people who say that it's because of the influence we've had when we went to school and we did poetry, what we used to be calling recitation. And you know, half the time you heard what we would say. You ask any kid in South Africa, say, what poems? They say, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Could never think beyond that. And you said an Afrikaans poem. Everyone of my generation will remember the one particular poem, and it was actually about a mosquito, but quite honestly, we didn't realize it was about a mosquito because we were taught for it to, like, it must just be, you drum it in your head. Mosquito yach, wach, ek sal jou kry, jou verbond, wach, ek sal jou kry. And quite honestly, went through primary school not actually making sense of these things. Like, this is actually about a mosquito. Someone trying to describe to you how this thing is so irritating, bites you, and then they kill it on the wall, you know? Because as it says, van jy sal net 'n bloedkol bly hier op my kamer meer. You'll just be splattered and become blood only on my wall. That's what really it says. Now, until you get into that, then you realize, actually, this is actually the story about our life. It's a story about the things that we live, whether it's in Sesotho. I must say, honestly, some of the poetry that was there in Sesotho, which we call recitations, they were quite good. But we were, let me say, for lack of better words, until you met someone who taught you very nicely about, and who loved the language, who loved how it would communicate, it would work. But poetry actually is certainly not boring. It's, maybe it's probably like most other studies or that people invest in as an individual who's in it, it takes a lot out of you as an individual, because imagine when you're actually putting yourself out there about some personal experiences and about some lives that you've lived, so you become vulnerable. I suppose like other authors who write books about all sorts of things. Once you put it out there, but in poetry it's about that experience that you're sharing with people, and they can interpret it either way, and they can make sense of it in either way. But it's certainly not boring. It is actually quite fun.
The country recently lost an astounding poet, Mr. Khositsile. As a poet, what did you like about his work? Oh,
Brawili. What a fantastic song. It's so difficult to talk about Brawili because sometimes almost, because I was so close to Brawili, he was so close to me. He took me in like a younger brother. And he actually was the main person who edited my book, my collection of poetry. And I remember him when he was going to edit it, he says, I will do the thing, but don't think because you are my comrade and friend, I'm going to let you easy. And actually, he didn't let me easy. He was so clear. What I love about the way he wrote, he was very specific, and which is what he kept on saying to me. Don't play with words. Be specific with what you want to communicate. And he tried to pull that out. It's like you drag words out of some. So if you want to say something is beautiful, what do you mean? How do you then put it? And you take that out. But he was also, in fact, his writing for me has always been closer to the way when I explain my love for poetry from the old people, because it's that easiness and sensibility to language, and it's also language. So English becomes only a medium, but he could have written in Setswana as he was. And I had known him from a distance for many years when I was a kid, And when he came back into the country, we started interacting a lot more when you would go and do performances. And then when I worked in the ANC head office, we were preparing for the 100 years of the ANC. He was one of the people, because I was coordinating that work, he was one of the people who came to the team because they were veterans of the ANC. These are people who had lived their lives in the ANC. So we came to work much closer. And that's the other thing. And he loved Palestine. I love Palestine. And he wrote about Palestine. I do the same. And I think the love of word and of language specifically is what actually attracted me to Brawili's work. And him being such a wonderful, simple, but you would never get away with murder with him, because he was also very strict. He's one person probably for me you can't put in words quite in simple terms, because he had so much to give, and he had already given so much. But I suppose, as we always say, with people who have passed on, who have touched our lives, we always wish that they would stick around, because we want them to be. And it's, for me, I think it's particularly sad because we had an agreement that he will be around to be a discussant when the book gets launched. So there's in some ways and in many ways it's a point that says, how come why didn't we complete? Why didn't we complete what we started together?
Yeah. And novelist Mandlalanga also spoke about your work. He said he was amazed at how sometimes you use your own language to express complex truths. How did you feel when someone like Mandlalanga also say your work is brilliant?
Yeah, it's amazing, but it's also touching for me, because people like Professor Khositsile, Mandlalanga, for me, these are iconic people in the literature world. Mandla is one of the greatest writers, I think, this country has had. He's in the league of the big writers. And it's funny that most people sometimes forget that he himself was a poet, and then he switched to writing. I remember him saying even at some point, poetry just demands too much. When I write in fiction, it's better. He can invest in that. So it's an honor to be spoken of, or at least my work to be spoken of in that particular way by someone of his stature, and someone I respect a great deal, and someone who, when I was doing my master's degree in England, and I wanted to use part of his work in my thesis dissertation, and I couldn't find it in this big bookstore. You mean they don't have Mandlalanga's book in this place? Mandla is big. So I ended up sending a message to a friend of mine who's close to him and said, "Can you just ask him why is his book not here?" So it's people, when you have take people with such contribution, I think, to our own learning and our own who opened our minds, really, because that's what people like Mandla, all his writings are about, telling the stories of our lives through, they open your mind to a world that sometimes maybe you are trying to figure out. And they say that about your own writing, it can only mean that you should take it a bit more serious and then work harder at it, and hope that you can then also, like them, become a beacon to other younger people who come after.
There are a lot of changes in our country at the moment. Are we likely to maybe have more of your work specifically on what is happening in the world of politics?
Oh, I'm already actually working on two different collections, and part of the thing is that when you write, you can't miss it. and my experience of my writing has been sometimes something would come through. As Hugh Masekela, the late Hugh Masekela once said to me, he says, he was talking about the song that he wrote for Mandela. He says, we are just conveyors of the messages that come from somewhere else. Even with poetry, it's like that. We are conveyors of things. So we see the world that's around us, but it gets communicated to us in a way that makes sense between us and the, let's say, the spirit world or whatever world, the universe that's out there, that for some reason artists are fortunate enough to link up with. And then it comes out. And yes, definitely there's material that is in my next collection about the present. And so, yeah, it will pick up on the on what happens. Of course, as it always happens, in some instances it's not so direct that you'd hear. You have to decipher them in between.
Okay, and lastly, would you please just like give us a few lines on any of your work?
Okay, I'll read a poem that I actually quite like, which tries to communicate hopes, dreams, life. The one I referred to earlier, which I called Msawawa, My Love. Between us, there's only a chasm because of dreams I weave for you. A lonely heart with tears of contrition bathes to atone this moment of separation. It is for love of you I brave these plains of skies that soak my skin and swallow the sun. How I long for the caress of your golden glow that blinds me in ecstasy as the rays penetrate this blackness at dawn. Between us, there's only a chasm because of dreams I weave for you. I pray the gods to take my soul, to spare me this desolation. Then I invoke the spirit for courage, so that once more I adorn you with jewels upon your bosom. Oh, how I yearn to touch your brown flesh that gives birth to children and buries them in their youth. Between us, there's only a chasm of dreams I weave for you. Eyes swell with wells, craving to hear your sounds. This countenance, clothed in smiles from the soul, where disarming grace belies the bare brute of breeding, my desire to be seduced by swaying hips of rainbow plumage that sometimes blends in the Madiba dance. Between us, there's only a chasm because of dreams I weave for you. My excitement spirits ahead, to be draped in white robes of the Maluti. Your delights are plentiful. My mouth salivates with appetizers which abound at the foot of your mountainous table. Your passion is a rising heat wave, momentarily doused, just so you can teasingly intoxicate with your earthen aroma. Between us, there's only a chasm because of dreams I weave for you.
Wow. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
That was Moferefere speaking to Crema Media's Polity about his book titled Shapes, Shades and Faces.